Hi, my name's Mary Robinson. Today we're going to be doing how to make a pattern for a dress, preferably a jingle dress, but you can use the same method to make any dress that you want. Okay, this is Winnie, my friend. She's going to be my fit model for the day, and we're going to be making a pattern for her so that she can have a jingle dress. So you're going to need a pair of scissors, some type of marking instrument. It could be a pen or markers. I like chalk. There's also Sharpie for when you do the more permanent part of the pattern. A measuring tape or a piece of string, some pins, some fabric, which this is a flat sheet that I bought from the Salvation Army for $2, so don't feel like you have to use your good fabric for this, and a ruler. So the first thing you're going to do is take some really basic measurements on your model, because you need to cut a rectangle of fabric that you're going to use to start your pattern with. So you're going to take a measurement from the high point of their shoulder, which is up here, all the way down to the length that they want their hem. Do you want your skirt to be ankle, or do you want it to be kind of mid-calf?
Ankle skirt.
Okay, so we're gonna go to the approximate length of where we think we're gonna have it, and then I'm gonna add a little bit of extra just to be safe. So I'm gonna cut this at 54 inches in length. Then you're gonna decide about how wide you want the skirt. I usually like skirts to come out to about here because it's gonna do kind of an A-line. Does this look good to you where you want to have it, about to here? Okay, so then you're going to take a measurement from the middle, like right in between their feet, to the widest point of where the skirt would come out to. I'm going to add a couple inches to that. So I'm going to go with 21. And I'm going to cut a rectangle piece of fabric that is 54 by 21. You're going to take your piece of fabric, in the longer part, you're going to draw a grain line on. That is the line that you're going to use to figure out where your pattern goes on your fabric. So on most fabric you have a selvage edge, which is a finished edge on both sides, and then you have the length that you purchase in the store. So the length of your body goes with the length of the selvage on the fabric. So we're going to actually put this up and down on your model. This is just the folded edge that was on the sheet that I used, and I'm going to actually keep that there because I like that for stability reasons. So you're going to take the grain line that you just marked on your fabric, and you're going to put it lengthwise with the body. Then you are going to keep the edge of your fabric in the center of their body. They're going to have half of a pattern, so you're going to make just half the pattern, and then you can either put a fold on the front and back or put a zipper, whatever you want. You're just going to make a half pattern so that way you don't have to do double work. So the first place that you need to put a pin is up here on the shoulder. That'll hold everything in place, and it's very important because the fit of the garment pretty much rests on the shoulder and the neckline. When you're doing a dress or a shirt, everything fits from up here. You can even use this same method to make a shirt for a man. It's the same thing. The other thing that's really important when you're making a dress for a woman or a shirt is that they're wearing the kind of bra that they're going to be wearing when they're dancing or they're going to whatever event, because otherwise the fit's going to change if they wear something different. So I'm actually going to take a piece of duct tape and tape this to her in the front so that I can get this neckline the way I want it. And then I'm going to put a couple extra pins down here to hold the center line in place. So always put your pins horizontally and keep your hand behind the pins when you're putting them on so that you don't poke anyone. Okay, so then I'm going to have you hold your arms straight out because I'm going to be working over here in the underarm area and doing the armhole. So then the first thing you'll do once you get to the armhole is you're going to find the side seam. On the side of your body, it's kind of like you're going to cut in half, basically. So you'll have probably a side seam on whatever garment you're already wearing, and you'll just put a pin there. And then you're going to put some more pins to hold everything else in place. So the next thing you're going to do is start cutting a little bit of this out of the way. You don't want to cut too much because you're just making room for the armhole part of the pattern, so you don't need quite so much here. So you can just start trimming a little bit. Be really careful not to accidentally cut the person's clothes or their hair. Just kind of keep your hand behind the fabric so you know what you're cutting. And then you're going to need some more pins. While you're doing this, you want to make sure that the front is still hanging nice and straight and that it's not like winging off to the side in either direction. Okay, so then you're going to keep going down the side and putting pins down the side just to hold things in place. You'll definitely want to put one out on the hip area and kind of in the waist. So the hip is kind of like the widest point, and then the waist is the narrowest point. And there's a huge variation in the distance between somebody's waist and their hip. You'll just have to look at how somebody's shaped and work with that. So then you can kind of see where the side seam of the dress is starting to just form on its own. The next thing that we'll do is the armhole. That can be really tricky. So I'm going to probably use the chalk for this because I usually tend to redraw my armholes a couple of times. And then you can see how this piece of fabric here is kind of popping out. That's going to be turning into a dart. So you'll mark where you want to do the shoulder seam. You want a nice straight line. You want to kind of just look at where, if you were kind of cutting them in half basically, and you're going to put the line here. Then you're going to put your shoulder edge right here where just before your arm starts to drop down. So that's where you're going to start your armhole. Then you can see that this, hold your arm out for me one more time. You can see that this is just turning into a dart right here. So you can take your dart either down like this, or you can go up. Either way is fine because you're going to end up cutting that fabric off. So you'll fold your dart down how you want it, and then you just put like one pin in there. Same way, horizontal. Okay, put your arm back down for me. Alright, so this is doing this bumping up thing, but that's because I've got all this extra fabric in here. So I'm going to start cutting some of that out. Hold your arm up again. I know it's a little scary having the scissors that close.
No, you're good.
It's a little daunting.
I trust you, not
But-
gonna cut me.
Okay, put your arm back down again. That looks pretty good. It's a little bit too tight still. Okay, up one more time.
Loosen it up.
Yeah, I'm gonna just kind of move this a little more because I don't like how it's hanging. Maybe more like this. You also kind of want to pay attention to where your dart is going too, because you don't want it to be winging up or winging down. You want it to be kind of straight across. All right, and then I'm going to cut some more of this fabric off. So
Okay.
I'll put my hand back here. Okay, that looks good. It's laying nice and flat now.
Should
Does
I
that
put my
feel
arm
good?
down?
Yep, you can put it down. Yep, that looks good. So once this is sewn together and this is on how it's gonna go, then that'll look better. And then we'll get rid of some of this bunching over here. Okay, so just kind of hold your arm out kind of like this. Then I'm gonna pull on this a little bit and flatten it out. So that looks pretty good like that. You have just a little bit of a hole in here, so we could probably use a second dart here, like this. Do you want it fitted like that, or do you want me to
Yeah,
just
I'd like
leave
it more fitted.
Okay.
I think.
That's, I mean, people worry that if you make it too tight that it's going to be uncomfortable, but actually when you have a more fitted garment, you have a better range of motion than you would in a garment that is bigger and looser. People
Yeah.
think if they cut it big, but what actually happens if you cut your armhole down too far, like if it's way down here, then you can't lift your arms up because all that weight is pulling from down here then. All right, so I'm going to mark this a little bit more over here just so I can see. Then I'm going to mark the side. And then when I get to this point, I just pretty much go to the hip and then I mark the bottom part down here, and then I connect that when I'm on the table later. So the other thing is you don't have to make your dress this long. We're just gonna go make the pattern this long, and then if you decide you want to cut some off when you're working, that is fine. That way you don't end up cutting it too short because it's harder to figure out that angle after the fact. Okay, so that looks pretty good. I'm just gonna put in the little dart in the front. So it's kind of bunching out here. So usually what you end up with is a dart that's right about like this. And I'm going to probably pin this onto your shirt for now, but then we can take it off there.
Yep, that's fine.
You can do this with the dress form too. You don't have to have the person, but it's the most accurate if you pin it right on somebody, because then you can take into account all of their unique shapes, because each person's shapes are definitely not going to match exactly what's on a dress form. Okay. So then what I do for darts when I'm marking them with a marker is I do this, and then what happens is you can see the negative space when you take them apart. So I'll show you that step on the table later. Okay, so I think we have the front pretty good. I realized I forgot to draw the neckline. That's kind of important. So you want to figure out how far down you want your neck. Do you want it kind of more scooped, or is right about here good for you?
I think I'd like it a little more scooped.
Like, where do you think you want it to end? Right
Right
about
here.
there?
Yep.
Okay. So I'm going to make a line here. Because you actually want it to come flat. You don't want it to go to a V or anything when you get to this point, because if you fold it over and you have it going up or down, you're going to get a V notch in one of two directions. So you always want this to be a nice 90-degree line with your vertical line that you have. Okay, so then you're going to take this from your shoulder line and you're just going to draw a nice curve. However you want. That's my rough one, and then I'll clean it up more once I get onto the table. So we're going to do the same thing on the back that we did on the front. You have a second piece that's the same measurements, or close to the same measurements. And you're going to pin it to the back, and then you're going to work over to line up with what you've already done. So you'll start by pinning in the middle of the back. And I did not remember to mark my grain line, but I'm just going to mark a really quick vertical line. So technically you should be marking a grain line on your fabric beforehand, but I'm just going to give myself a basic one to follow. So the first place you go to is the shoulder, because you need to make sure that your shoulder seams are going to line up. So I'm going to cut some of this neck out of the way that I did over here. Can you just turn towards me a little bit? There we go.
Yeah.
So I'm going to cut some of this out of the way because it's kind of causing everything to bump up. There, that's better. Okay, so then you can see what you're doing, and you will fold down your edge to make what looks like a seam to line up with the line that you've already drawn. Then at that point you can take the pin out that you had in there and go across the seam this way with your pins. So you'll want to put one up here at the top by the neck so that you have something that's going to hold it in place, because if everything's moving from there. Okay, so you put that pin there, and then we're going to mark the neckline in the back. Okay, so then I will take this and do just the edge so that you can tell where the edge of this fold is going to be, because that's going to be the shoulder seam on this side. And then I kind of messed up my line on this neck here, so I'm going to just fix that a little bit. Okay, so the next thing you're going to do is work on your armhole. I'm going to put an extra pin here to hold this, because this part of the shoulder seam is important, where it comes down to the edge of your shoulder. Okay, so then I'm just going to fix this up a little bit. All right, so then I'm going to draw the back armhole. So we're going to basically follow the same process that we did earlier. I'm also going to put a pin down the center back to hold it in place, because it's going to, if it moves around, that's going to cause everything to be off. So I just put one here at the back waist. So then we're going to follow where we started our arm here and keep going down on the back. So then hold your arm out for me one more time. All right, so then the back armhole is going to be a little more square than the front armhole. And we need to line up the side seam that we already did. So I'm going to cut some of this out, just like I did on the front. Okay, so that's out of the way. And then we'll do some more pins. So once you get down to here, I have all this excess fabric. I'm going to cut some of this out of the way too. I'm going to leave this hanging here because when we do our A-line, I don't want to take off too much of it and then have it. I mean, I can see that I did my line here, but I just, in case I need that, I don't want to take off too much. So I'm going to cut off just some of it to keep it out of the way. Then we're going to fold this down. I think I can take off some of this also. Because if you have too much bulk in the way, then it kind of causes some problems. Okay. So then we're going to work over here, and I'm going to fold this under and make a seam out of it, just like in the front. So then when you get down here to your underarm, you want to do the same thing on this curve. Oops. You want to do the same thing on the curve under your arm as you did on the front neckline. You want to make sure that it's at a 90-degree angle with your vertical line so that it doesn't turn into a V shape. So right here is where my armhole is, and I'm going to go across like that. And then I'm going to draw just a little bit of that. And then this armhole will come down like this and come out. So it sort of drops down a little more square, and then the front is a little more round. Let me have you pull your arm back because I might redraw this a little more. No, that's pretty good. I'm just going to scoop this out a little bit more right there. Okay. Then you can kind of hold your arm there for a minute, and then I'll get the rest of the pins in. You pin the back to the front, just like we did on the shoulder. And then we're going to pull some of it out when we get to the back part, because there's a little bit of a bulk here. So we're probably going to turn this into a dart also. So you need a dart here, and don't be intimidated by darts. We'll do another segment about how to sew darts. They're really not that difficult if you've never done one before. Draw the line here like this, all the way down. Okay, so that pretty much does it for what we need to do on the body. So you can see that we have the back and the front all figured out. Just check that you have everything drawn before you take it off, because it's really kind of annoying to have to put it back on again. So, center line's good, darts are good, shoulder seam, front neck, front darts. We know where we want our hem to come to, but we can kind of, where did you say you want your hem? You want maybe have it, you want to have it maybe here?
Mid calf, yeah.
Alright, so let's just mark a dot here, and then we'll figure out the rest on the table. Put your pattern down on a table, and you're going to sort it out so that it looks like a usable pattern when you're finished. So we're going to start with this line that I marked down here for the hem, and you're just going to clean the line up a little bit and make it so that it's a 90-degree with your center front. So again, this will be where you're going to just mark. You can either do a fold, or I just put CF for center front. And then I'll just put fold on there too. One or the other. Either way is fine. So then we had this line marked out here for how wide we wanted the dress to be. So we're just going to pretend that we're making an A line with this. And we're just going to draw a line from that up to the point that we had the hip marked. Then we're going to get up here, and we're going to clean these lines up here. So this has a little bit of a curve on it, so I'm just going to draw the line as clean as I can get it. The next thing that you need to do is look at how your darts are. So you can see that the negative space from the darts is right here. So I'm going to take a lighter marker to start with on this, because it will be a little bit less easy to see, and then what I'll do is clean it up with a darker marker. When you do your dart, just going to kind of visualize where the edges of the dart are based on what we took out. There's the edges of those lines. So instead of this being round, because it's going to be a little tricky to sew round, we're going to turn it into a diamond shape. So at the widest point, you're just going to draw a straight line, because when you go to sew this, you're going to basically take this and fold it in half and stitch it. So I just made a V shape there, and then I'm going to draw a line to mark the center of the V shape. And then I'm going to do the same thing up at the top and just turn it into a diamond. So it doesn't have to be exact, but it's pretty close. So if you want to remark it after you do it with a darker marker, that's fine. Then you can see it a little bit better, and you can kind of correct the mistakes a little bit. This side was a little wider than that one, so I'm just take it in a little bit and just kind of move it over a tiny bit. So that's kind of what the final dart is going to look like. So what you're picturing is that this is going to be folded like this, and you're going to stitch on this dark line to pull this piece of fabric out, and then on the right side of the fabric it's going to be just looking like a seam. So then you're going to do this other dart up here, and that's also kind of a V shape. So you do the same thing, you just kind of draw where the edges of these are. And then on this kind of dart, because it's on a seam, you have to do what's called truing up the pattern. So you actually will take this and fold it in whichever direction. So this is where you decide if you want the extra fabric to be at the bottom or the top. I'm going to fold it down. And then I'm actually going to cut it off, because the edge is going to change based on how you do that. So I'm assuming that there's some seam allowance on here. I'm going to probably clean this up again later, but that's how it's going to look on the side. It's not going to be a straight line. So then you take your darker marker and you just clean the line up a little bit more. You can kind of see that where those folds are is where the center and the edges of this dart are going to go. So that's how that dart is going to look. So then I do the curved seams. If you want to use something like a roll of duct tape, I have somewhere I have a nice curved ruler, but I just kind of freehand stuff when I do it. I'm not real picky. This should be again at a 90 degree so that it's not all funny. And then if you do decide to put a zipper down the front, then you're going to slice this in half on your fabric, and then you're going to need room to have your zipper, so you don't want that at an angle. So then this came out pretty good. We're just going to leave this line how it is. Any of these straighter lines are going to get the ruler, and then the curved ones you're just going to do kind of freehand, or you can hold something round and kind of roll it as you go. So I'm going to walk over here to do this and just draw that into a cleaner line. Okay, so that's pretty good. That is basically the final front pattern. So what I'm going to do now is cut it out, and I'm going to go at a 1/2 inch seam allowance on the edges. You can use whatever seam allowance you want. You just need to remember that's what you're going to be using to sew with. I'm not going to leave any seam allowance on my neck, because I like to just put bias tape on the neck. I don't like to have any extra fabric there, and I don't like to use a facing. But if you want to use a facing, then you need to put seam allowance on your neck. I can also see that I cut this armhole down a little bit too far, because this should be part of the seam allowance coming out. So I'm just going to patch it in with a piece of tape for right now, so that when I cut it, it's even. So you can just start cutting. You can take your measure and actually mark your seam allowance if you want to. I'm going to eyeball it because I'm impatient. But you can go like this and just mark where your seam allowance is going to go. That's a 1/2 inch on this ruler. So I'm just going to cut it because that's what I'm used to doing. So again, when you get up to the part where the dart is, you just want to refold it just to be sure that you did it right. You can even put a pin in there when you do it. And then see, if you go up, the difference is that the excess will be up here. So you want to make sure that you're consistent on whatever way you go. So I went down. So that's pretty good. That stays in there nice. There's my 1/2 inch. Okay, so I did just add on a new line for where the mid calf will be. That way, if you want to later on have a longer dress, you have the fabric to do it, because it's going to continue getting wider. Otherwise, you're going to be hobbling around in a dress that's too narrow. So you wouldn't just go straight down, you need to go outward. So if you wanted to cut this, this is the line I drew. There's the 1/2 inch seam. Again, if you're going to use bias on the bottom, you don't even need the 1/2 inch, but you could just fold this out of the way when you're cutting if you're going to make it a shorter dress. So we're going to work on the back piece now. We're going to basically do the same thing we just did on the front. We could start with the darts and just mark where the lines are going to go. The back darts are usually a little bit bigger than the front darts. Sometimes you don't need back darts at all, it just depends. So, and we're going to put a center line on this too. Okay, there's the back dart. Then we have our back grain line. I'm going to clean up the neck. I have my front piece right next to my back piece because those are actually going to sew together, so we want to make sure that they line up really nicely with each other. So I'm going to take the shoulder seam and just draw it straight. Then the same thing with the back grain line. I'm going to make sure that I have it up far enough. Then I'm going to do my 90 degrees here on the back neckline. Draw it so it's a nice curve. And then the same thing with the armhole. I'll just draw it nice and neat. The other important thing when you get to the armhole and the shoulder is that you make sure your shoulder seams are going to line up, so you can actually just take your front and back. Mine's just a teeny bit off. It's not too bad, so I'm going to leave it, but sometimes I've been off by more like a 1/2 inch, so just kind of make sure that they line up, because you're going to sew these together and you don't want them to be mismatched. So then you're going to go do your side seam. You can see right where this was. Same thing with your side seam, you're going to want to line that up between the front and back. So before you do that, you need to keep your dart closed. So I'm just going to put a pin back in there again to hold it still, because this will be sewn before you put the side seam together. So then I'm just going to draw the side seam. Then, because I didn't mark the back on this one, I'm just going to line it up to the front, because those are going to be sewn together anyway. So I'm going to hold this over here. So this will be right here when we do sew it together. It'll line up to there. And then down to the hem. So I'm going to do the full hem length, and then I'm going to mark the shorter one. Alright, so we're just going to kind of A-line this out a little bit. And then we'll go pretty much straight across over here to make sure that we get the center back done. So we'll just continue this line straight down, because this is also going to be your fold line. It's pretty unlikely that you would put a zipper in the back for a woman, because it's kind of difficult to zip your own dress up. So it's nicer if you make at least a one-piece back, and you can make a one-piece or a two-piece front with this pattern. So then we're going to keep going down to the bottom. I'm just going to draw it a little bit longer, and then I'm going to make 2 lines going across for where those 2 hems were. And then I'm also going to double check it, because I want to make sure that when I go to cut it, that it's very close to the final pattern. Okay, so then I'm just going to double check this. This is actually called walking your pattern, and you just kind of hold the lines together where they would be if you were actually sewing these together. So you just walk it all the way down. It's pretty close, not totally perfect, but pretty close. Okay, that's good. So I'm just gonna kind of clean this up a tiny bit, curve it a little bit, and then we should be good. So then I'm gonna cut this other piece the same way with the seam allowance. I'm not gonna put seam allowance on this fold line. I'm only gonna put it on the side and the armhole and the shoulder. Now we're gonna figure out how to make our sleeve, and she's decided that she wants to have a shorter sleeve. So you're just gonna take a couple of really quick measurements and make the sleeve, and then you're gonna match it up to the pattern you already made. So the shoulder seam was right about here. We're just gonna do a length. And then you need to do a circumference at the bottom so that you can figure out how much space to leave. Does this feel pretty good like that?
It's
Do you want it a little
loose.
tighter?
Yeah.
Okay.
That should be
Like that.
good.
Okay, so let's just make sure you can pull your hand back out of there. That's the key thing. You can do the
Tiny
same thing
hands.
with a long sleeve, but if you make it really tight on somebody's wrist, you want to make sure that they can fit their arm back out of the opening that they've chosen. Okay, so we did 12. All right, and then we had 7 for this length. Okay, so then we're gonna come over here to our pattern. To get the sleeve shape correct, you're going to pin together your dress pattern at the shoulder seam. That way, you know where your armhole shape is gonna go, and so you have it so that it's gonna line up really nicely. So we're first going to mark a grain line on our sleeve, because again, you're going with the length of the body. So that's just a really light one for now. Okay, and then we know that we're gonna sew these together, and that gives us what our total armhole measurement needs to be. So we're gonna go from here, and then we decided that we wanted to have a 7-inch length for the sleeve length. So that's gonna go to here. And then we said 12 was our width for the bottom of the hem. So if you're gonna do 12, then you're gonna do 6 and 6. So you can just use your center line that you made and just mark it like that. So then you're gonna take this and draw a nice straight line. Doing this in a lighter pen again because I might need to clean it up. With sleeves, things can get a little bit tricky. So what I'm gonna do is take this curve. Normally when you have a sleeve pattern, it has kind of a, almost like these two shapes are reversing. So when you sew that together, in order to get it to fit your body correctly, you're not actually gonna follow this curve exactly. You're just gonna follow it for part of the way. And then when you get down here, you're actually gonna reverse it so it comes out more like this. So if we check this to see how close I was close. I gotta add a little bit more just to make sure that you've got enough. And then I'm gonna give a little more height on this cap, the sleeve cap on this part, so that we have enough movement. Then you can make your front and back the same, but really our front and our back armholes are not the same. They're a little bit different. So I'm gonna make them just a little bit different. And then what you can do to be able to tell which one's which is to put some little notches in there. Standard is to put 2 notches on one side and 1 notch on the other, and that way you can tell which one's your front and which one's your back. So right here is going to be where we line up with the shoulder seam. And then we'll just take this curve, follow it down, we'll walk this pattern, double check that we got it right. It's pretty close. I'm going to come out a little more there. Okay, so then the next thing you have to do is draw the underarm seam for the sleeve itself. So that can be a little bit tricky because these two have to line up, and if you do too severe of an angle, it won't work. So I'm going to do the first one that I know is kind of at a big angle and it's longer. So we've got a measurement of 5 1/4 for that. So we come to the other side. We want to have 5 1/4 on that side too. So we're just gonna go like this, and that looks pretty good. So these are pretty much the same between the front and back. Make it easy on yourself and make them the same, or you can cut them different and have the back and front be a little bit different from each other. I think I'm going to cut them different, and then I'm just going to put a little mark on one of them. So this is the front and this is the back. And so then what you do is you follow this and line it up again so you can see where your notches are going to go. And then when you actually go to sew this, you could just put a little tiny snip there so that you can copy it. And when you put the sleeves on, you'll have to pay attention where the front and the back is going because they won't be exactly the same on either side. So we're just going to write sleeve and front. Then we're going to do the same thing on this. We're going to cut it out and leave the 1/2 inch seam allowance everywhere except for the hem, because I'm going to use bias tape on this hem. Here's your finished pattern. I've marked the pieces and I've listed what they are, back, front, how many of each you need to cut. The sleeve is done. I checked everything. And thank you so much for watching today. Stay tuned because we'll be posting more videos on the next steps after making the pattern. We'll talk about how to cut it, how to string the jingles, and some of the other tips. Thanks again.
Miigwait!